Three trucks, three engines. One question that gets argued about in every Ford forum, every parking lot, and every comment section on the internet is the twin-turbo 2.7 the smart choice? Does the 3.5 EcoBoost actually hold up under real work? Or does the naturally aspirated 5.0 Coyote still win the long game? We didn't want another opinion piece. We wanted 200,000 miles of hard data. So we bought three identical generation F-150s, one with each engine, and we ran them into the ground together. Here's exactly what we found. Let me walk you through how this test was structured because the methodology matters just as much as the results. We sourced three 2018 F-150 Super Crew trucks, all four-wheel drive, all with the same 3.55 rear axle ratio, and all purchased with under 3,000 miles on the odometer. One got the 2.7-liter EcoBoost V6, one got the 3.5-liter EcoBoost V6, and one got the 5.0-liter Coyote V8. Same drivers rotated across all three trucks on a weekly schedule, so no single driving style could skew the results. Same routes, a mix of highway commuting, city stop and go, and regular weekend towing duty, pulling an identical 7,000-pound enclosed trailer. Oil changes were done on the same interval across all three, full synthetic 5W30, changed every 7,500 miles, and every fluid sample, dyno pull, and inspection was logged and dated so we could track the story as it unfolded rather than just showing you the ending. At the 25,000-mile mark, all three trucks were still in their honeymoon phase. Nothing dramatic to report, but we started collecting baseline data that would matter a lot more later. Dyno numbers at this stage were close to factory advertised output across the board. The 5.0 Coyote put down horsepower numbers consistent with its naturally aspirated rating, while both EcoBoost engines were actually exceeding their advertised crank horsepower once measured at the wheels, which lines up with how Ford has historically underrated these turbocharged engines compared to their real-world output. Fuel economy at this stage told an early story that would hold up for the rest of the test. The 2.7 EcoBoost was the clear leader in unloaded fuel economy, averaging close to 21 miles per gallon in mixed driving. The 3.5 EcoBoost came in a bit behind that, and the 5.0 Coyote trailed both, which is exactly what you would expect from a larger displacement, naturally aspirated V8 competing against smaller turbocharged 6s in normal, unloaded driving. The story started to diverge once we hit towing duty regularly at the 50,000-mile checkpoint. Towing that 7,000-pound trailer is where turbocharged engines either prove themselves or start showing their weaknesses, and this is where the differences between the 2.7-liter and the 3.5-liter became impossible to ignore. The 2.7-liter EcoBoost, despite being a genuinely impressive engine for daily driving, was working noticeably harder under sustained towing load. Boost pressure was staying elevated for longer stretches on grades, and we recorded higher average coolant and oil temperatures during extended towing pulls compared to both the 3.5-liter and the 5.0-liter. This isn't a flaw exactly, it's physics. A smaller displacement engine relying more heavily on boost to make torque under heavy load is going to run hotter and work its turbochargers harder than a larger displacement engine with more torque available at lower RPM. The 3.5-liter EcoBoost handled the same towing route with noticeably less strain, staying cooler and holding boost pressure more conservatively because it simply didn't need to lean on the turbos as hard to move the same load. The 5.0-liter Coyote, unsurprisingly, was the most relaxed of the three undertow, with the lowest sustained coolant temperatures and the least dramatic swings in transmission fluid temperature, benefiting from that naturally aspirated torque curve and larger displacement, doing the work without forced induction working overtime. By 75,000 miles, we pulled the first oil samples for lab analysis on all three trucks, and this is where things got genuinely interesting from a wear standpoint. Both EcoBoost engines showed slightly elevated levels of fuel dilution in their oil samples compared to the Coyote, which is a known characteristic of direct injection turbocharged engines, particularly ones that see a mix of short trips and heavy load towing. Direct injection sprays fuel straight into the cylinder rather than the intake tract, and under certain conditions, particularly cold starts and heavy boost, some of that fuel can wash past the piston rings and dilute the oil in the crankcase. The 5.0 Coyote, also direct injected, showed some fuel dilution too, but at meaningfully lower levels than either EcoBoost engine, likely due to its naturally aspirated combustion process running cooler and more consistently under the same towing conditions. This is a well-documented trade-off with modern turbocharged direct injection engines, and it's exactly why more frequent oil changes are recommended for EcoBoost engines that see regular towing duty, even though our test kept all three trucks on the same interval to keep the comparison fair. The carbon buildup story followed a similar pattern. At 75,000 miles, we pulled intake components on all three trucks for a visual inspection of the intake valves, which is where direct injection engines are particularly vulnerable since there's no fuel washing over the valves to keep them clean the way it happens in older port-injected engines. All three trucks showed some carbon deposits because that's simply an unavoidable characteristic of direct injection technology, regardless of manufacturer or engine size. The 2.7 EcoBoost showed the most noticeable buildup of the three, followed closely by the 3.5 EcoBoost, with the 5.0 Coyote showing measurably less carbon accumulation on the intake valves at this same mileage point. Higher boost pressure and higher combustion temperatures under towing load appear to accelerate this process on the smaller displacement turbo engine, which lines up with what independent testing and forum data from EcoBoost owners running heavy tow duty has shown for years. At the 100,000 mile mark, we ran all three trucks through a proper chassis dyno session to check for any power loss compared to their baseline numbers. This is where the twin-turbo 2.7 started showing its first real signs of stress from the demanding duty cycle we put it through. It had lost close to 6% of its baseline rear-wheel horsepower, more than either of the other two engines. The 3.5 EcoBoost had lost around 4%, and the 5.0 Coyote had lost the least at just under 3%. None of these numbers represent catastrophic failure or anything close to it, but the trend line was already forming, and trend lines matter a lot more than any single data point when you're looking at long-term durability. We also noticed the 2.7's turbochargers were showing very slightly increased shaft play when checked by a technician, nothing requiring immediate replacement, but a measurable difference from its baseline inspection at 5,000 miles, and a difference that was not present yet on the 3.5's turbos, which are physically larger units, better suited to sustained heavy load without working as close to their limits. Transmission behavior became a bigger part of the story at 125,000 miles. All three trucks used the same 10-speed automatic, so this gave us a clean way to isolate how much of the wear pattern was driven by the engine's characteristics rather than the transmission itself. The truck paired with the 2.7 EcoBoost showed the earliest signs of clutch pack wear when we sampled the transmission fluid, likely a byproduct of that engine working harder and generating more heat under tow, which transfers directly into the transmission fluid temperature over thousands of towing miles. The 3.5 EcoBoost's transmission fluid sample looked healthier at the same mileage, and the 5.0 Coyote's transmission fluid was the cleanest of the three, consistent with it running the coolest under identical load conditions throughout the test. This is an important point that a lot of people miss when comparing engines in isolation. The transmission does not care what is making the power, it cares about how much heat and torque it is being asked to manage, and an engine that runs hotter under load is going to put more cumulative stress on everything downstream of it, including a transmission that would otherwise be identical across all three trucks. Fuel economy numbers held remarkably consistent with what we saw early in the test, and this became one of the most practically useful findings for anyone trying to decide between these engines for their own truck. Across the full 200,000 miles, factoring in both unloaded daily driving and weekly towing duty, the 2.7-liter EcoBoost averaged the best overall fuel economy by a modest margin, followed by the 3.5-liter EcoBoost, with the 5-liter Coyote coming in as the least fuel-efficient of the three, though the gap between the Coyote and the 3.5 was smaller than most people expect, generally less than 1 mile per gallon in mixed driving. However, and this is a detail that does not get talked about enough, the fuel economy advantage of the 2.7-liter shrank considerably during towing weeks specifically. Under load, the smaller engine has to work proportionally harder to move the same weight, which narrows the efficiency gap significantly compared to what you would see in pure daily driving comparisons. At 150,000 miles, we started seeing the first real maintenance divergence between the three trucks that went beyond routine service. The 2.7 EcoBoost required a water pump replacement around this mileage, a known wear item on this engine family since the water pump is integrated into the timing cover on many EcoBoost applications, and it is a job that requires more labor than a traditional bolt-on water pump. This repair ran approximately $900, including parts and labor. The 3.5 EcoBoost made it to 200,000 miles without needing this same repair, though we know from broader ownership data that this same water pump design exists across parts of the EcoBoost lineup and failures do occur. Our particular 3.5 simply did not experience it within our test window. The 5.0 Coyote required no comparable cooling system repair at any point during the test, consistent with its simpler, naturally aspirated design having fewer failure points overall. By 175,000 miles, all three trucks were still fully drivable, and none had experienced a major engine failure, which is worth stating clearly because durability testing like this can sometimes get dramatized into engines blowing up, and that's simply not what happened here. What we were tracking was the gradual accumulation of wear, efficiency loss, and maintenance costs that tells the real story of long-term ownership. At this point, the 2.7 EcoBoost had accumulated the highest total maintenance cost of the three trucks, driven primarily by that water pump replacement and a turbocharger wastegate actuator that needed attention around 160,000 miles, a $450 repair. The 3.5 EcoBoost sat in the middle for total maintenance costs, with routine service and one spark plug replacement set being the primary expense beyond standard oil changes. The 5.0 Coyote had the lowest total maintenance cost of the three trucks by a meaningful margin, requiring nothing beyond scheduled maintenance items across the entire 200,000-mile test. When we finally reached 200,000 miles, we pulled all three engines for a full teardown and measurement against factory specifications, the same way we would approach any serious long-term durability comparison. This is where the cumulative story from the previous 175,000 miles turned into hard, measurable data. On the 2.7 EcoBoost, cylinder wall measurements showed the most deviation from factory tolerance of the three engines, particularly in the upper cylinder area, consistent with the higher operating temperatures and boost pressures it experienced regularly during towing duty. Piston ring tension tested lower than the other two engines, and the turbochargers showed measurable shaft play beyond what is typically considered ideal for continued service, meaning a rebuild or turbo replacement was likely approaching within the next 25,000 to 50,000 miles had the test continued. The 3.5 EcoBoost measured meaningfully better across every category. Cylinder wall wear was within a tighter tolerance range, piston rings tested closer to original specifications, and while its turbochargers did show some wear consistent with 200,000 miles of use, they were nowhere near the level seen on the smaller engine, benefiting from being larger units that did not need to work as close to their operating limits to move the same loads. The 5.0 Coyote measured the best of all three engines in nearly every category we tracked. Cylinder walls, piston rings, bearing clearances, and camshaft lobe wear all came back closest to factory new specifications, which tracks with everything we observed throughout the entire test regarding operating temperature, oil dilution, and carbon buildup. So what does all of this actually mean if you're standing in a dealership trying to decide which engine to put in your driveway. The 2.7-liter EcoBoost is a genuinely excellent engine for someone who does mostly daily driving with occasional light towing. Its fuel economy advantage in unloaded conditions is real and meaningful over the life of ownership, and for the majority of F-150 owners who rarely, if ever, tow anything heavy, it's going to deliver a long service life without issue. But our test data makes clear that if you're regularly working this truck under heavy tow loads, the 2.7-liter is being asked to do more than its smaller displacement was really built for on a sustained basis, and that shows up over time in the form of more heat, more wear, and higher cumulative repair costs. The 3.5-liter EcoBoost represents what I'd call the smart middle ground for anyone who wants strong towing capability without stepping up to a larger displacement V8, and it held up impressively well throughout this entire test, striking a real balance between the fuel efficiency benefits of turbocharging and the added durability margin that comes from not needing to work those turbos as hard under load. But based purely on what we measured at teardown, from wear patterns to maintenance costs to sustained cooling performance under heavy work, the 5.0-liter Coyote is the clear winner for anyone planning to keep their truck long-term and use it for real towing and hauling work. It sacrifices a bit of fuel economy in exchange for a simpler, naturally aspirated design that consistently ran cooler, wore less, and cost less to maintain across the full 200,000-mile test. None of these three engines failed our test. That's an important point to end on. Ford builds all three of these to be genuinely durable, capable engines, and plenty of owners put well past 200,000 miles on any of the three without major issues, especially those who aren't regularly working their trucks as hard as we did throughout this comparison. But when you put them side by side under identical, demanding conditions and measure everything from oil chemistry to turbocharger wear to what the cylinder walls actually look like after 200,000 miles, the data tells a clear and consistent story. If you tow often and want the engine most likely to go the distance with the fewest surprises, the 5.0-liter Coyote earned that spot in this test, fair and square. If you found this kind of real-world, long-term comparison useful, make sure you're subscribed because we have more engine durability tests coming, including a look at how the diesel options in Ford's lineup stack up against all three of these gas engines over the same kind of extended mileage and towing conditions. Drop a comment and let me know which engine surprised you most and which comparison you want us to run next. Take care of your truck, match the engine to how you actually use it, and it will take care of you for a long time. I will see you in the next one.